Good evening and welcome to ABN. I am Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch, and I'm very pleased to announce tonight a new ABN show called Jihad Watch that will be airing monthly on this channel, and I will be hosting it. Tonight, however, we have, to start the series, a special presentation, a debate between me, David Wood, Anjem Choudary, and Omar Bakri Muhammad on the question of, did Muhammad exist, which is the topic of my new book called Did Muhammad Exist? Tonight, therefore, being the host of the show, I cannot very well moderate my own debate, and so we have brought in the illustrious Chris Conway, who will be taking it from here. Chris?
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be a part of this program, this inaugural program here in ABN tonight. So it's a 2-hour show, and we'll be going through the format very soon. I just want to let anyone out there know that you can always call us, and we'll have an opportunity later at 248-416-1300. You can also check us out at any time at ABN on our website, which is abnsat.com. And we are excited to have this program. We have 2 Christian apologists and 2 Muslim apologists as well, and we'll be getting started real soon here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start the clock. At this point, we're going to have our opening statement given by our Muslims, and that is Omar Bakri and Anjem Choudary, and they'll have 8 minutes combined. So they have, each of them have an opportunity to take up that 8-minute time period. And what we will do, we'll keep track of the clock, as we have done in other programs like this nature. At about 30 seconds, though, we're going to give them, and in fact the Christian apologists as well, when they have their chance to speak, a 30-second warning. So I say up front, I'm not trying to be rude, but we are going to be very, very conscious of our time. And so I will be jumping in at that 30-second point to let you know that's how much time you have left. So at this point, we will restart the clock, or start the clock at 8 minutes. And gentlemen, Anjem and Omar, you can start right now. If you can hear me.
Yes,
Hello, begin, inshallah.
Hello.
Yes.
You can make your opening statement right now, sir.
Okay. My opening statement is the question you are really, risen. I have something more than that. Did Noah ever exist? Did Abraham never ever exist? Did Jesus ever exist? Did Moses ever exist? It's not about only the question about did Muhammad ever exist? Did your brain ever exist? So I don't know really the questions you are trying to really push. If there is really ever exist. For me, I can answer it so easy by saying the Quran exist. I can myself read it. I can go through all its pages, and I can prove beyond doubt that no man can make a chapter like the Quran. So where does Quran come from? So this is where, unless we prove rationally where this Quran come from, we cannot answer your questions. You see, if you want to go to answer your questions now, did ever Adam was exist? Because people used to say, did God ever exist? So anybody could reason a question like this, especially those who disbelieve in God. They do so, and even now those who claim to believe in God, they try to put doubt in the mind of the people, typical followers of the shaitans, whoever, really, who always want to put doubt in the mind of the people. But for me, as a Muslim who carry Islam as an intellectual and rational belief, not as a blind faith, the way you carry, the way you try yourself really to present yourself all the time. Quran exist. I am exist. So I can examine everything easy. For me, the Quran said in chapter of Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse 23, God said, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ. If you go doubt what we revealed to our servant, do one chapter similar. وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ, and call all your friends, all your supporters from the man and the jinn, and even for everybody's, if you are speaking the truth. وَإِن لَن تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا. You will never be able to do it. So no one can do one chapter similar. For me, that is challenge for my own rational thinking, for my own existence. So why that Quran, which is so simple, has been really revealed to the Messenger Muhammad in the time of the Arab, where they themselves really speak, they have no civilization except their own ability to speak Arabic properly, their ability and their own talent to be able to speak in a poetic way, and no one of them was able to bring one chapter similar. Non-Arab, they don't speak Arabic. The Arab people with this Quran challenged them. They did never doubt that this is Arabic book and written in a particular style, in a particular really shape, in a particular ways, and no one of them was bringing one chapter similar. So where is this Quran come from? You go to your home, you see your own laptop in the garden. The rational questions: who put it there? Because the laptop is really has certain quality, weak, limited, needed for somebody to put it there. So you will ask yourself rational questions: who put it there? So you want to have rational answers. Now, did ever the one who put it there exist? That the question itself really becomes silly, and they see and become no longer it is a good question, become shallow questions, because you know very well that you left your laptop at home and suddenly you found it in the garden. So you can't just say it's moved by itself, because you know the laptop, it cannot move by itself. You have previous informations about that particular thing. So rational thinking need realities, sound senses, which is really, and sound brain with previous informations. That process of rational thinking, you perceive the reality by your own sound senses to your sound brain, and you will able to have sensations, previous informations about that reality. You will able to have thought. So the thought you want to really establish, did ever the Messenger Muhammad, may the peace of God be upon him, exist, will be answered by the Quran exist. And the Quran really, it is amongst ourselves as a Muslims, it is a word of God, and we can read it, and that word of God, it is what we need to know, what he addressed us, what he told us. Otherwise, you see, will be story called Abraham, will be story called Moses, will be story called Jesus, will be only storyteller, fairy tale. But the fact I have a book which I could examine, that man has no finger on it. That is the question. Man cannot do one chapter similar. So where this Quran come from, and rationally I can prove beyond doubt, is not man-made. Is not really made by human. It's not made by jinn. The challenge for the man and the jinn to bring one chapter similar. If you failed to bring one chapter similar, and you will do, and everybody did. So this Quran, it is rationally, man has no finger on it. I can refer to it, and that is a miracle, extraordinary, matter with a challenge, unbeatable. So the challenge now, bring one chapter similar. If you cannot, and you will not, as God said in chapter of Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 23 and 24, then you see, believe in God or wait to go to hellfire. So it's up to you, and if you want to take the challenge or not. So I don't know how much time I have, but that is really will be my opening, and I will leave to my brother Anjem if you want to add anything.
Yes, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. And let me just add a little bit, inshallah, to the beautiful words of Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad in his beautiful statement. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is a debate today about whether or not Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam existed. And we are not surprised, in fact, as Muslims, that the Christians will try to bring this question. And I suppose Robert Spencer is hoping that some Muslims will begin to doubt, in fact, the existence of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or try to stop the tsunami of conversions, in fact, to Islam across the whole of Europe and in America. And they're very worried, obviously, for the Sharia as well to be implemented one day in their own country. So with all of these, if you like, threats to their own existence and the implementation of the Sharia to remove their own system, I can understand why this kind of book would be written in this atmosphere. But the first thing I would like to say is that if you are going to judge the Quran and the Sunnah, the sayings and actions and the consent of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the basis of the preservation of the text of what Isa alayhi salam or Jesus said, then I'm not surprised that you will have this kind of question, because when we look at what was revealed to the messenger Jesus or Isa alayhi salam, we can see in fact that his words were not written down contemporaneously.
Anjem,
This is in fact not the case.
Anjem, we're going to have to, I'm sorry, we have, we're either out of time or we're just about out of time. So I'm going to say, I apologize for making that abrupt. We'll obviously have more chance to talk. We've reset the clock at 8 minutes, and now we'll have Robert and David fill that 8-minute time slot right now.
I am very happy to hear Sheikh Omar say that this is a matter of intellectual and rational investigation, because that is exactly what it is. This is a historical question. It was interesting that he noted that people are asking or should ask, or perhaps he thought it was absurd that they should ask if Jesus existed or Moses existed, but actually people have been asking that for centuries and investigating Judaism and Christianity historically. Some have done so fairly, some unfairly, but the investigation has never destroyed or even threatened Judaism and Christianity. And so there's no reason why this should threaten any believing Muslim. It's a matter for historical investigation. Islam, like Christianity, is a historical faith that ought to be susceptible to rational and intellectual historical investigation. Now, the primary argument that Sheikh Omar advanced was that the Quran itself is a miracle, and that no one can produce, as the Quran itself challenges them to do, a surah like it. Now, actually, this, of course, is a completely subjective measurement. What constitutes something to be like it? I might think that somebody could produce a surah like it, and you would say, no, it's not like it at all. Or you would say, oh, that is like it. And I would say, no, it's nothing like it. Actually, you can go to surahlikeit.com on the internet and find quite a few surahs like it. That is, material written in Quranic Arabic. As far as I'm concerned, it's very, very similar to the Quran, and it's a completely subjective measurement, as I say. In other words, what is like it is in the eye of the beholder, and there is no intellectual or rational way to establish, or an objective way to establish, that something is objectively like it or objectively not like it. When we look at the historical record, the main problem with the Quran is that, according to the canonical Islamic story, Muhammad received it between the years 610 and 632, and then it was memorized in whole or part by various of his followers, and then collected together during the time of the Caliph Uthman in the 650s, and the variants burned. And so we can understand that between the 630s and the 650s, Muslims are supposed to have had the Quran in whole or part, and there were many people who were Hafiz who had memorized the entire Quran. And then by the 650s, the Quran was completely codified and distributed to all the Muslim provinces. But when we look at the actual records, the people who the Arabs were conquering in the 630s, 640s, 650s, and beyond, until the 690s, until the early 700s, they never mentioned that the people who were coming and conquering out of Arabia had a holy book at all. Neither did the conquerors. There is no mention of the Quran in the first 60 years or more after the Quran is supposed to have been written. Now, this is remarkable because the Quran is supposed to have been the impetus for those very conquests. In other words, the words of the Quran: fight against the unbelievers, strive hard against the unbelievers, make the unbelievers submit and pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. This was supposed to be the energizing force behind these conquests. And yet, neither the conquerors nor the conquered people ever mention this book. And then when they do, Sheikh Omar mentioned Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran. And some of the earliest attestations, some of the earliest mentions of the Quran that still exist come from the early 8th century, not in the 7th century at all. And they say these people, they have these new holy books that they claim come from Allah, and they have the Quran, and they have Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, it's very remarkable to identify a chapter of a book as if it were a separate book, but it strongly suggests that the book itself was not collected in its final form, even at the beginning of the 8th century. So you have this long silence where there's no mention of the Quran from the people you would expect most strongly to mention the Quran itself. And that goes for Muhammad as well, that Muhammad is never mentioned. There is no indication whatsoever between the 630s and the 690s that the Arab conquerors had a prophet. They never mention him. Now, you would think their fundamental driving force, the Uswa Hasana, the perfect man, the excellent example of conduct, and they never mention him? And the people who they conquer, when they write about how the Saracens or the Hagarenes or the Ishmaelites, note that they never call them Muslims. They came and they said they laid waste and they took over everything and they destroyed churches, but they never say, not once, no one, that they had a holy book or a prophet or a new religion. And this is an extraordinary and absolutely inexplicable silence, unless these things simply did not exist at that time. Now, we know that the Hadith are the primary sources for the life of Muhammad, and that the Hadith have an extraordinary amount of detail. You put together all the Hadith, and you can account for practically every day of Muhammad's life, except there are some very notable and strange things about that. Like I say, we never hear about Muhammad for 60 years after the Arab conquests began. And then we begin to hear about him very, very sparsely. There are affirmations that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and so on. And then a few stories here and there, but the Hadith are not collected together, are not published until the 9th century. And the Muslim scholars themselves admit that the Muslims, the various warring factions among the Muslims, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and various factions even among them, would fabricate stories of Muhammad in order to support their particular beliefs and practices. And then their rivals would fabricate stories of Muhammad that competed with those and had Muhammad doing something else. And so you have Muhammad saying in warfare, do not harm the women and children. And then you have another hadith in which Muhammad says, they say, they're killing the women and children of the pagans. And Muhammad says, well, they are of them. In other words, they are with the pagans, and so it doesn't matter. So which did Muhammad say? Kill the civilians, kill the women and children, or not? The massive contradictions is just indication that these things were fabricated for political purposes long after Muhammad is supposed to have existed. And there is no real historical core that can be recovered from that massive material. Now, of course, the Muslim scholars say, well, no. We can find the authentic hadith by looking at the isnad, the chains of transmission, and that so-and-so told so-and-so, who told so-and-so, who told so-and-so, and that shows, if you have a reliable chain of transmission, that the story itself is reliable. But if the story itself can be forged, as the Muslim scholars themselves admit, then why can't the isnad chain be forged as well? Obviously it can. And that was done in order to buttress the positions of various warring factions among the Muslims. But the yawning silence cannot be explained. If Muhammad had existed at the time he was supposed to have, and if the Quran existed coming from Muhammad and codified during the time of Uthman, then why would the Muslims be absolutely silent about it for so many decades after this is supposed to have happened? And why would the non-Muslims who were conquered never give any hint, even though they understood this was a challenge to their own religion, that the conquerors came with a new religion? And this is the basic understanding of why we know that Muhammad did not exist, the Quran was fabricated later, and the whole thing was done for political purposes, as I'll explain later.
Well, and speaking of later, we will be coming right back after this quick break. We've actually gotten through both of our opening statements from our Muslim and Christian sides. David hasn't had a chance to speak yet, but David will certainly have a chance, as Robert will. And gentlemen, thank you for your participation so far. We're going to go to a quick break, like I say. We'll be right back after this. We are back with our program, Jihad Watch, again, the inaugural show. And again, we will give our viewers a chance to call at 248-416-1300. You may want to be jotting questions down. You'll have the opportunity to ask any of the four gentlemen here tonight to answer your questions. So that'll be the last segment of the program. But now as we get into our second segment, we will have a 6-minute time frame for both Muslim debaters here, Omar and Anjem, to share that 6 minutes, however they care to. But we've started to set the clock. And gentlemen, you may start right now with your first rebuttal.
Sheikh Omar.
Yes.
Hello. You may start right now. The clock is set at 6 minutes, and go right ahead.
This issue to call it yourself surah.com, it is really very silly. It is anybody who's speak Arabic very well, he understands that the people do not understand the challenge which is the Quran has mentioned, to bring one chapter likes, not to bring any Arabic letters with any Arabic statement with any meanings. And therefore really most of the Arab Christians from the Eastern Church, they know very well no man can do one chapter. Similars, even the top scholars of Arabic language from the Jewish communities, from the Christian communities, in the Nazareth, even where the Jesus born, no one will be able to bring one chapter. Similars, even the Arab who is really not a Muslims, they failed, and even the Muslims themselves cannot do something similar. That extraordinary phenomena was really challenge to all human and jinn, and none of them really beat that challenge. So this is my stand. My rational belief is basically based on the principles. There is a miracle. I could myself really observe day and night, and I found the challenge.
Anjem, would you go ahead and jump in? We're having some technical difficulty with a Skype connection. So Anjem, could you just jump right in?
Well, I think that Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad is obviously talking about the challenge of the Quran, which is the challenge for the whole of mankind to do something similar. And as he quite rightly said, if you try to match the meaning, then you will compromise on the grammar or the style. If you try to match the grammar and style, you will compromise on the meaning. So certainly the Quran is a challenge there for the whole of mankind. If people can do a chapter similar, then that is the challenge. And that is the reason why Islam is still the fastest growing ideology and religion in the world today. Now, what I would say in relation to what Robert Spencer was saying concerning the hadith, he's completely misrepresented the science of hadith. In fact, there are about 39 different sciences in ulumul hadith, the sciences of hadith, dealing with the chain, ilmul riwaya, ilmul diraya, dealing with the text. And basically it is the most meticulous verification of the statements and the actions and the consent of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, I would venture to suggest the most meticulous verification of anyone's statement in the history of mankind. And the reason why Robert and David write books like Did Muhammad Exist is because basically they are jealous, because Christianity was not written down contemporaneously. We all know in the Council of Nicaea about 300 or 400 years later, you know, they tried to get together some of what they could find from the Gospels, or what was according to Mark or according to John or someone else, and they discarded hundreds of them, and then they fabricated whatever they wanted to. They added from King Constantine and from Paul, you know, who used to be Saul, an arch enemy of Jesus, and finally, you know, they came up with the invented, book, you know, which they have in their hand today, or at least, you know, one of the many versions which are in existence. You see, unlike this, the Quran is unique. There's only one Quran, and the fact that it is unique is proved, in fact, that with 1.5 billion or 2 billion Muslims in the world, nobody has another version of the Quran. And this idea that the Quran, you know, was compiled, you know, 20 years after the death of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is as well complete rubbish, because it was written down on parchments, on gazelle skin, on leaves, you know, on bones in the time of the Prophet. You know, Zayd bin Thabit, he was selected by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu to write down every verse from the gazelle skin, to have two witnesses. And obviously this procedure to put them together in the order in which the Jibreel alayhi salam told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam to put them, to with the way that they had memorized the Quran, this process took a few years. And it was not about getting rid of the variants, the things which did not agree. Rather, there was only ever one version. And this needs to be understood. And even if you have a look at the statements of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are not just the books which Robert Spencer has probably heard about, like Bukhari and Muslim. In fact, we have books called mustakhrajat, which are books purely of chains which are meticulously collected and verified. People have traveled, they've made sure that the person who is mentioned in the chain has met the person before. They check the date of birth, the date of death, the name, the nickname, his qualifications, his award, how he heard the hadith, how he delivered the hadith. You can find huge volumes which only contain 1 or 2 hadith, because this has been meticulously checked. Unlike what you have in your hand in terms of the Bible, which you can change every day, you cannot say the same about Islam. The book, Does Muhammad Exist, reminds me of the Emperor's New Clothes. Robert Spencer may think that he's wearing clothes, but for the rest of the world, he's completely naked. And we're not going to be confused by, this the charade of academia and the fact that, he's suddenly written a book. What's the next book going to be, Robert? Does Anjem Choudary exist? Or, does your own parents exist? This is completely absurd. The question, is something which, people would like
30
to
seconds.
pose, but at the end of the day, it's complete rubbish, really, as far as we are so concerned as Muslims. And I remember when Robert Spencer, he tweeted me the other day, I said to him, which I still say now to him and to other people who want to read this book, sanity is indeed a great blessing from Allah for all of us. Robert, we still invite you to Islam, accept the truth, and forget this absurd question, does Muhammad exist? Because really, it's not even a question, because it doesn't have an answer for.
Okay, Anjem, thank you. Good pick up there from the little technical difficulty we had with Omar Bakri, and you filled a good part of that 6 minutes. We thank you for that. At this point, we're going to turn it over to David and Robert for their 6 minutes, and it starts right now.
All right, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Anjem and Sheikh Omar. We obviously have many differences, but I respect you gentlemen for at least standing up for what you believe and engaging in debate. As for your claim that this is an absurd question, to question whether Muhammad existed, I happen to disagree completely. Now, just to put the cards on the table, I happen to believe that Muhammad existed. Obviously not as you believe Muhammad existed, but I do believe there was some kind of historical figure about Muhammad, but I don't believe you could ever defend his existence. I believe that I might be able to, and Robert and I are going to have our own debate on that maybe later this week. But I'm certainly willing to put your methodology to the test tonight to see if you see what you can prove. Now, for our viewers, when historians approach a question like the existence of some ancient figure, they don't just assume, well, it's absurd to question that. No, they're looking for evidence. And when we look at the evidence for Muhammad's existence, or the existence of any early figure from many centuries ago, historians are looking mainly for early sources. They want early sources, sources that come soon after the events they report. They'd like to have multiple sources. So, you could have one source, that might be some evidence, but it's much better to have multiple sources. And they'd like these sources to be independent. In other words, one source isn't just quoting some other source. That wouldn't be independent sources. They're looking for several sources that aren't just drawing from one another. And so when you put that together, historians are looking for multiple independent early sources. And my friends, Anjem and Omar, you don't have that. You don't have anything close to that. All you have are late sources, most of which come from a couple centuries after the time of Muhammad, and which were written during a time when your Muslim brothers were cooking up stories like they were cooking up kebabs. So we have to look at this, and from a historical perspective, we have to look at that and say, wow, there's something strange going on here. So the real problem that you have, the central problem that you have with your knowledge of Muhammad is that as time goes on, your knowledge of Muhammad seems to increase. And that's the opposite of the way things normally go. Normally, the people who know the most about someone are the people who are there, and then the next generation doesn't know as much because they only know what that earlier generation recorded. And then the next generation and the following generations, they can't know more than that first generation. And what we have in your sources is, we go to the first century of Islam, we have virtually nothing about Muhammad during that time. Then it's in later centuries where we start getting all these stories about Muhammad. So basically, if you go back to the first several generations of Islam, if you go back to that first century, it's Muhammad, who's he? That's what history tells us. Then the following century, a century later, then we have enough to fill a biography like Ibn Ishaq. And then the following century after that, then we start having multiple, massive, multi-volume collections of ahadith. So now what you have is your knowledge of Muhammad is rapidly expanding, and that's the opposite of what we would expect if Muhammad were this historical figure that you believe in. If you were correct, if your hypothesis, if your view were correct, what would we expect? We'd expect at least many mentions of Muhammad during the first century when Muslims were going out conquering and so on, but that's not what we have. And so you haven't given us any historical evidence at all for Muhammad's existence. We want to know, what are your first century sources that talk about the existence of Muhammad and tell us about his life? We'd love to see them. The only real argument you've given is this challenge of the Quran based on Surah 223. Produce a chapter like it. Produce a chapter like it and call on your witnesses if you don't believe this is the word of God. Well, I don't believe that this is the word of God, so let me meet the challenge real quick. I'll read Surah 109, one of the short ones. This would be one of the easy ones. Say, O unbelievers, I do not serve that which you serve, nor do you serve him whom I serve, nor am I going to serve that which you serve, nor are you going to serve him whom I serve. You shall have your religion, and I shall have my religion. To viewers who aren't familiar with the Quran, that's an entire chapter of the Quran right there. And according to our opponents tonight, that no one could produce a chapter like that. Well, I'd like to take a crack at the challenge. I jotted it down as soon as you mentioned it. Here's my chapter like it. Say, O Muslims, Robert does not believe Muhammad existed, but you do believe Muhammad existed. Nor is Robert going to believe that Muhammad existed, nor are you going to believe that Muhammad didn't exist. To you be your belief, and to Robert be his belief. Now, I've given you a surah like it. I have to call on my witnesses. Robert, will you bear witness that that is like what we read in the Quran?
David, I bear witness that that is like the Quran.
We have met the Quran's challenge. Now, what are you going to say? You're going to say, well, it has to be in Arabic, or that it has to be a good Muslim witness? That's what you want, isn't it? That's what you want. It has to be a good Muslim witness, and that's why this challenge is absolutely absurd. You're saying, here's our challenge, and we have to agree. We have to agree on it. Well, fine. I'll say it. You have to agree with me. You have to bring me a chapter that I agree could not be surpassed by anyone. And until you do, the Quran is false. It's a book of Satan or something like that. And you have to bring me something that I agree with to prove me wrong. So it's an absurd challenge. Robert already pointed that out. Now, Anjem referred to the meticulous verification process of the hadith. What was the purpose, Anjem, for this meticulous verification process? The reason for it was there were so many, literally hundreds of thousands of false stories about Muhammad going around. Someone tried to come up with a method. Now, why is this methodology absurd? For those of you who don't understand the Quran, I mean the hadith, the isnad criticism method, it's I got it from so-and-so, who got it from so-and-so, got it from so-and-so, got it from so-and-so. And if we like all the names on that list and we think they're all good Muslims, well, then we conclude that it's a reliable hadith. And why is that? Why is that absurd? Because I could write down an isnad right now, going back to Ibn Abbas, and show you that my hadith is a correct one. I'm going to come up with a hadith for you, Anjem.
Okay, David. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, that's a good rebuttal there. We have 6 minutes have passed now. We have another 6 minutes. We reset the clock. Anjem and Omar, you can go ahead and start anytime.
You see, I think I was hearing, you see, what he's saying, you know, for the last maybe few minutes.
We have a bit of an echo.
You can hear me.
Omar, we have a bit of an echo, so perhaps we could try to correct that.
Thank you for choosing Noble Talk.
Yes, I can hear you, no problem. Let me explain things. You see, it's easy for you to talk in subjective way till the morning. But the questions, the stick of Moses, that his own sign of his miracle, does not exist. We don't have it today. Where is the stick of Moses? Where is the one which is Jesus? He touched and he become. You see, he rise from his graves. Where is, the fire of Abraham? Where is the flood of Noah? So I'm talking about all those miracles which is really has been performed by God, which is really proven that the messengers are the messenger of God, has been chosen by God, are not exist. But the miracles of the final messenger Muhammad, you see, exist. For me, is irrelevant now how he's been combined, how being transmitted, does the people write it in the time or not? All this is irrelevant and important, insignificant for me. Wasting of time, you see, yourself talking about these issues. I got front of me books, no one can do something similar. Obviously, what Robinson he tried to do, that he makes one chapter is Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. I can say, oh Omar, I do not take what said. All this really is just pathetic. because he does not even speak it in Arabic. He speaks it in English. In English, you know, he himself, it is not the same. So we're talking about, tell me, bring one chapters like قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. Bring something similar in Arabic language, not to say to me, say, oh Omar, I do not really take what you take, you don't take. That is really pathetic and is very shallow. So plus, I'm telling you, Christians Arab never use your own argument. By the way, you people in the West, there's no prophet come to you. You are really have no prophet. The only prophets and messengers are really come to you. It is really the final messengers. His followers come to you. Otherwise, even Jesus born in my own countries. You see, we have Jesus here in Nazareth, in Asham regions, Moses, Abraham, Jesus, Noah, all of them, Muhammad, in that area, in the Middle East and in the Arab Gulf countries. But in Europe, in America, you got Madonna and Michael Jacksons, and you got your own prophets, etc. So you got Obama. But the questions, don't argue with things really you do not understand. Or what you want to do. You got Quran, exists. Go read it. And go check it and bring challenge and beat the challenge. In the Quran, after I believe that no man has really finger on it, that's what make me believe in Abraham. What make me believe that Jesus was exist. What make me believe even that is Noah was exist or Adam and Eve was exist. So because it is in the Quran, has mentioned to me the chapter Muhammad. You see, and that's called Surah Muhammad, has mentioned to me Muhammadun Rasulullah. So for me, I don't want to go to all this historical things because, as you said, it's subjective, and some people will say it does not exist, some people say it exists, but that Quran is exist, and that Quran is a challenge all mankind and the jinn like you, even those who have really speak Arabic, Christians and good Arabic teachers, Jews, mean the Jewish communities and the Arab and the Christian communities, no one said what you said. So they are just like, you know, they are listening to you, and they are really know the Arami, what called radios and televisions are a bunch of people who are just fabricating stories. Now, what you said now there's nobody marry woman on the age or marry girls or marry children. Now there's all this story you was attacking Muslim for years about it, that you said Muhammad he married to young daughters or to baby. Does not exist. Mean what? Mean everything you try to fabricate about him was he fabricate stories about the person is fictions. So you can see even from your own argument you show the contradictions. You make yourself really a laughing stock in front of everybody's by just bringing the ideas that did he ever exist? Yes, indeed he exists, and the proof for that is Al-Quran. You did not beat the challenge. You just really try to say to fool the people who are listening to you. Even if I want to say it myself in Arabic, in other way, to maintain the meanings. The meanings, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say Muhammad, O kafirs. Bring me another wording. Say Muhammad, O kafir in Arabic. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. What do you want to use? You cannot use any Arab words. But give me any other Arabic text, I can do something similar. Any Arabic books, I can do something similar. Any stories in Arabic, I can do something similar. I can maintain the grammars, the meanings, the forms, the style, but no way for any chapter in the Quran. And try get help from your own Christian friends in Lebanon or in Syria or in Damascus. They will say the same things. So take it or leave it.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and we have one last 6-minute segment here, another rebuttal number 2 from our Christian gentleman here, and we've reset the clock. Go right ahead.
Okay, in the first place, I'd like to speak up as a Melkite Christian in defense of the Christian Arabs. Actually, at the website that I referenced earlier, surahlikeit.com, the challenge to produce a surah like it is taken up in flawless Quranic Arabic, and any Arabic speaker, however fluent, can see it and can read it and can hear how the music of it, the rhythm of it, the sound of it is very much like that of the Quran. But again, this is a subjective measurement. And I will say it's like it all night long, and Sheikh Omar and Anjem will say, no, 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 it's not like it at all. And that just shows that the whole exercise is useless. There is no way that anybody could produce anything that would ever satisfy this challenge, because it's built in to be self-refuting. They will never accept that anything is like it, and then they can't bring that forth as some kind of proof. Now, Anjem said, since the gentlemen on the other side of this debate are basing their whole argument on the Quran, let's talk about the Quran. Anjem said nobody has another version of the Quran. Apparently he's forgotten that while the primary version out of Cairo that was printed in 1924, from which most Qurans are taken nowadays, that is from the Hafs manuscript tradition. But there is another manuscript tradition that is accepted by Muslims, mainly in Western and Northwest Africa, and that's the Warsh tradition. And there are very small but significant differences between the two. For example, in Quran chapter 2, verse 125, the Hafs text has Allah commanding the Muslims, take the station of Abraham as a place of prayer. But the Warsh tradition does not have the imperative in that, and it says, they have taken the station of Abraham as a place of prayer. Now you might say, well, that's a small difference, it doesn't matter. Well, actually, any tiny difference matters, because Anjem said there's no variation in the text of the Quran. There are no variants, but the Muslims themselves have variants. In the Hafs text, the Quran chapter 3, verse 13, says that at the Battle of Badr, there was one army fighting in the way of Allah and another disbelieving, whom they saw as twice their number, clearly with their very eyes. But in the Warsh text, the pronoun is different, so that the text reads, whom you saw as twice their number, clearly with your very eyes, rather than whom they saw. And in the Hafs Quran, chapter 3, verse 146, says, and with how many a prophet have there been a number of devoted men who fought? But the Warsh asks a very different question. It says, with how many a prophet have there been a number of devoted men who were killed? Not who fought, but who were killed. Small variations? Certainly. Do they change the meaning or the doctrine of Islam or anything of that kind? Of course not. But the whole Muslim argument here is that the Quran is miraculous, has no variants. Actually, there are very many variants. He also mentioned, Anjem mentioned Zayd ibn Thabit, who is supposed to have collected the Quran together. Now, Islam teaches, there are many hadith that say that Zayd himself was a hafiz, that is, somebody who had memorized the entire Quran text. And yet, he said that when he was asked by Umar and later by Uthman to collect the Quran together, he originally did not want to, and he felt like it was the worst job that he'd been given. It was a terrible burden. Now look, if he was a hafiz, why couldn't he have just sat down and written it out? Why did he have to go around asking people what it said? And then there's a tradition in which Khuzaimah gave him the last two verses of Surah At-Tawbah, the 9th chapter of the Quran, which would have been lost if Khuzaimah hadn't popped up at this right moment. And also, there's another tradition of an old man who, toward the end of his life, he reminisced and he said, we used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity Surah At-Tawbah, but it was lost. And so the collection itself, even according to Islamic tradition, was very haphazard. And here again, it was very late. If we have people saying that the various chapters of the Quran were existing along with the Quran, then clearly they were not collected together as an individual book at that time, and this is 50, 60 years after they were supposed to have been collected. Also, there's a very telling thing. Even though, according to Islamic tradition, Anjem just denied it, but actually it's well attested in Islamic tradition that Uthman in the 650s collected the various manuscripts together, collected the various people together who had memorized portions of it, codified the text, burned the variants, distributed the result. But Abdul Malik, the caliph in the 690s, said that he collected the Quran in another Muslim tradition. Now, you have two choices about that. You can say that Uthman collected the Quran and the Muslims had it for 40 years, and Abdul Malik was crazy or something when he said this. It makes much more sense if Abdul Malik actually did collect the Quran together or begin to bring together the materials that became the Quran, and then in order to give his work authority and authenticity and to foster its acceptance among his people, he said, oh, this is something that's 40, 50 years old. Uthman actually did this. And that would account for the variant traditions. But otherwise, there's really no explanation as to why. But there's so many traditions, as I outline in the book, of Abdul Malik in the 690s collecting the Quran together, and his lieutenant in Iraq, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, originating various Muslim practices that are now taken for granted as being Quranic, but they actually started in the 690, 60 years after Muhammad is supposed to have died. There's no explanation for that if Muhammad actually lived.
You have 30 seconds. Do you want to jump in here, or would you? We're going to head, unless you make, I guess, 30 seconds and counting.
I'll just read a quotation really quick to agree with Robert. This is from Ibn Umar. You certainly should respect Ibn Umar, Abu Ubaid's Kitab Fadl al-Quran. Let none of you say, I have learned the whole of the Quran, for how does he know what the whole of it is when much of it has disappeared? Let him rather say, I have learned what remains thereof. So we have one story from Anjem, another from Ibn Umar, a companion of Muhammad. Who are we going to believe here?
At this point, we're going to let you think about that out there watching on this program tonight, and we're going to go to a quick break. We'll be right back after this. And we're back with Jihad Watch. We're now going into our crossfire section. Each side will have an opportunity to share 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes of the topic. And that topic, again, is, did Muhammad exist? So at this point, we're going to open up start the clock here. For our Muslim debaters, share the time how you wish. The 4-minute time clock has started. Go right ahead. Anytime, I'm not sure if you hear.
Okay. Did Muhammad ever exist? Indeed, with certainty, he exists. God said so in the Quran. Did Adam ever exist? Indeed, Adam exists. God said so in the Quran. Did you see Eve and Noah, Abraham, Jesus, Moses exist? Because God said so in the Quran. So what make Muslims believe that Jesus exists? What make Muslims believe in Moses and Jesus? The fact is mentioned in the Quran. Zayd bin Thabit radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, whether he doesn't want to write it or he write it, whether he himself recorded or did not record it. Irrelevant and insignificant, because for me, what makes me believe rationally, beyond doubt, about all the galaxy or all the universe was exist, the fact, really, the Quran said so. So that universe, that stars, that everything, something I can really perceive by my own sound senses. Easy to say, the sun is there and Robinson is there. But we speak about issue in the past. He said is subjective. Everything is subjective. Everything it could be. But what we have, miracle is exist. And no one can do something similar. Whatever he try, whatever he plays, whatever he said, surah.com is funny.com. Or what we want to say, what make people believe in all those previous messengers and prophets and nations, the fact the Quran, for us as a Muslims, ask any Muslims, they believe in the existence of Moses. He said, yes, well, the Quran said so. Not because really just what you think that Muhammad said so in the Sunnah. Even the Sunnah, the Prophet sayings, and the Prophet Muhammad action and consent. Why we believe in all this? Because the Quran said so. Every single text, every single hadith, it is really has its own roots, origins in the Quran. That is the miraculous things. Remember, the Quran has revealed in 23 years and written in a particular way, which is really not the same way has been revealed. If you look to the orders of the chapters, that's the way God asked the Lord Gabriel to teach Muhammad to memorize it in this order, not in the order how the verses has been revealed. Yet, how could the Quran, which came all one, you see, in one night, the night of power, yet mentions event which is going to happen in 23 years in the life of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions before he has companions, before he has believers on him. So I think, focus with me on one thing. The Quran, it is miracle. It's a challenge for your existence and for my existence. So therefore, either beat that challenge or accept it and accept whatever comes on it. And because I accept rationally the argument beyond doubt, this book of God, man got no finger on it. There's no one chapter of the Quran could match really with any other things you could mention and produce. But the whole hadith of the Prophet Muhammad does not match with one chapter of the Quran. The 400,000 hadith of what the Prophet Muhammad has said and even transmit to us does not match with one chapter of the Quran. Remember, the Arab was illiterate. They never read, they never write. Even the Prophet Muhammad said, don't write down what I say.
30 seconds.
Write only what God says. And that's why they don't want to record it. It's miracle. Quran is miracles. You see, that is what we believe in, and that's what proven that all those nations and messengers was exist, and with certainty beyond doubt, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah and the final messengers to the whole mankind.
Okay, thank you. Sheikh Omar, we will continue this rapid exchange in our crossfire section here. The clock has been reset to 4 minutes, and gentlemen, go right ahead.
All right, well, I'm glad we have a clear argument from Sheikh Omar, namely, he specifically said, what makes Muslims believe Muhammad existed? The Quran says so. They don't believe in Muhammad's existence because of any historical evidence. They don't believe in Muhammad's existence from archaeology. They believe in Muhammad because the Quran says so. Well, that's grand, but the Quran also says Alexander the Great, Dul Qarnayn, traveled so far west, he found the place where the sun sets, and he found the sun setting in a pool of murky water. You believe that because the Quran says it? The Quran says that stars are missiles that God uses to shoot demons when they try to sneak into heaven. Do you believe stars are missiles that God uses to shoot demons because the Quran says so? The Quran says that semen is produced between the backbone and the ribs. Do you believe that because the Quran says so? You just throw out all medical evidence that we could ever believe in because the Quran says so? So what reason is that for anyone to believe in Muhammad when the Quran is so full of constant errors? Why would we believe anything it says? Now, going back to this challenge, because it's the only argument we've really been given, is, for the Quran, why we should take the Quran seriously, is that supposedly no one can produce a chapter like what we find in the Quran. I already did that, and I'd just like to say a few more words about why this challenge is so absurd. I invite Sheikh Omar and Anjem to write a symphony like those of Mozart. I want to see it. I'll give you a year. I'll give you a year to write a symphony like that of Mozart. If you don't do it, you have to admit that Mozart is the inspired music of God. And on top of that, I want you to write a play like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. If you can't do it, you have to admit that Shakespeare was a prophet. And we could do this all day long if we're just going to be entirely subjective. I'll give you a rap. If you other rappers can't write rhymes like mine, you have to admit that mine are divine. Now, Robert, can you produce a rap like that?
I can't.
And neither can Anjem. And you know what? You can try. You can get Eminem. You can get P. Diddy. You can get anyone you want. But Robert and I are going to be the judges of this contest. And I assure you, you will fail. Not all of you put together in the entire world. All the rappers in the universe will be able to put together a rhyme like that. And we will judge the contest, by the way. So beyond this, think about the argument, right? No one can put words in this order. It's the same. It would work equally well in English or in Arabic. What is a verse of the Quran in English? It's a series of words, one after another, arranged to convey some kind of meaning. What is it in Arabic? It's a series of words put in some order to convey some kind of meaning. The Muslim argument is no one in the world except God could put these words in this order. What sense does that make? Human beings can put words in any order they want. There is no arrangement of words you could put together that a human being could not put together. There is no arrangement of words God could put together that a human being could not put together. What sense does that make? It makes absolutely none. And the fact that that's your entire argument should tell our viewers something. You have no case for Muhammad's existence. And as I said earlier, I believe I can make a case for Muhammad's existence, but you can't. We've asked, what's your first century evidence? We have none. What's your argument? Well, the Quran says so. The Quran, which says all kinds of things that are demonstrably false. And the only other thing we heard from Anjem is that there's only one version of the Quran, and here again he totally contradicts his own Muslim sources. There's never been any different version of the Quran. That was the entire purpose of Uthman's recension, was all the different versions of the Quran that were circulating. Ibn Masud, whom Muhammad, your prophet, said, if you want to learn the Quran, you learn it from 4, and Ibn Masud was first on the list. According to Ibn Masud, Surah 1, Surah 113, and Surah 114 are not supposed to be in the Quran. Ibn Masud's Quran was different. Ubay ibn Ka'b's Quran was different. And yet you tell us one version and totally contradict everything we know about history? It's a pattern with you, isn't it, Anjem and Omar? Rejecting everything we know from history.
Thank you, David. Thank you, gentlemen. We will continue now. We've reset the clock. Another rapid exchange here, 4 minutes. Anjem and Sheikh Omar. Right ahead.
God said in the chapter 15, verse number 9, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidun. Verily, we the one who revealed the Quran, and we going to preserve it and protect it. So God has preserved it. Whatever you want to say, it is really is for me as Muslims and for 1.5 billion Muslims. Quran is no one, there's no man made, and no even man put his finger on it, not even the messenger Muhammad, may the peace of God be upon him. He wrote down any verse of the Quran. So all this, it is for us, because we believe rationally in that miracle called Al-Quran. Miracle is a challenge. Nobody can beat it. That is with miracle, extraordinary phenomena. Arabs never read, never write, but they speak Arabic so good. They have no civilization to be proud about at that time, except that they're able to speak Arabic in very poetic way, and yet they keep challenging each other in Arabic language without even to know how to read, how to write. They sniff the Arabic language and its grammar and its style. That's why the miracle was much with their own talents and was really defeating. The way in the time of Jesus was the miracle much with the people talents. That's why they was able to deal with medicine. But he himself really came and he showed them ashes. Whereas he touched it and they rise again. God make it for Jesus to prove that he is a messenger of God, not son of God. And the same thing, the stick of Moses. So what I want to say, we have text said we has revealed the Quran and we preserve it, God who preserve it. Therefore, all the story you could bring and all the matters, it is really defeated by one argument. Quran is really no one, no man, no jinn, no human can do something similar. And to say to me, can you repeat so and so? You see, yes, you see, irrelevant for me to repeat what you said because the challenge comes from God. We're proving about a command of God, not proving that you could speak and I could do that or not doing that is irrelevant. Or what I'm saying, That word of God contains meanings, contains style, contains certain very grammars. You need to do to defeat that, and it is impossible. Nobody did it. Therefore, I leave to my brothers and chums to continue to say whatever he like.
Hi, John.
Yes. How much time do we have exactly?
How much time is left? 90 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, basically, obviously, Shaykh Omar Bakri Muhammad is absolutely correct that the proof of all of the messengers of God, and indeed the best proof of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the inimitability of the Quran. And I would just like to add that it's not only a linguistic miracle. In fact, the Quran is as well a scientific miracle. It is a mathematical miracle. It is a historic miracle. It is a linguistic miracle. This Quran was implemented as a law and order for over 1,300 years. If you look, for example, at Britain's Halesbury statutes, in the Houses of Parliament, they fill whole libraries. How is it that this one book can be implemented as a law and order and is sufficient for a solution for all the problems that mankind faced throughout the whole of the Islamic State, from China all the way to Africa, into the heart of Europe, just south of Paris, for over a millennium? And yet they never needed any more than the Quran as the main guidance and the principles and the law and order. So we can see that the Quran is definitely a judicial miracle. Plus the Quran as well contains, a miracle about the way that the embryo develops, something that people only recently discovered. And as well, the Quran contains as well, information about the separation between the salt water and the seawater, and the sweet and the salt water, something which Jacques Cousteau discovered, many hundreds of years later. So this is a proof, in fact, that the Quran must be from the one who created us, and it is proof as well for the existence of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
We need to move along. Okay, thanks a lot. One last 4-minute segment, gentlemen. The clock has been reset. Go right ahead.
First off, I have to say that I believe people knew the difference between freshwater and saltwater before Jacques Cousteau, and independently of the Quran. Unfortunately, we see that the Quran is very repetitive, and so are our interlocutors tonight. They keep saying the same thing over and over without offering any evidence, without offering any support, and without offering any rebuttal to what we're saying. And so the only thing I can do is repeat what has been said already, and that is to remind our viewers that David and I have produced evidence that the Quran has variants, that even Muslims themselves have variant manuscript traditions of the Quran, the Hafs and the Warsh traditions, that there are different Qurans according to Islamic tradition itself, produced by Abdullah ibn Masud and Ubay, and that that Muhammad endorsed Ibn Masud as a reliable witness, and yet his Quran differed from that is accepted as canonical today. There are other textual variants. There are scientific problems, as David said, with the sun setting in a muddy pool at the time of Dhul Qarnayn and so on. None of these things have been answered. We offer them as evidence that the Quran is not the book of God and is not a reliable witness, therefore, to the existence of Muhammad. Also unanswered is the fact that there is no mention of Muhammad, that all the evidence that we have that he existed arises in the 9th century, over 125 years after he died, or supposed to have died, in the 8th century and the 9th century, and that these things are a proliferation of detail when before there had been absolutely nothing. And that shows all the signs of legendary elaboration of a mythical figure, and not the faithful carrying on of traditions of a historical figure. Or otherwise, as David pointed out, there would have been traditions right from the beginning that did not have this kind of elaboration. But what we find, if you compare Ibn Ishaq to al-Waqidi in their retellings of the same events, that al-Waqidi, even though he's writing 50 or 60 years after Ibn Ishaq, that he has so much more detail about what Muhammad said and did in particular incidents. And so you have to ask, well, did Ibn Ishaq not know the people who knew these things, and they weren't written down? Or is it much more likely, and I think it is, that al-Waqidi is embroidering, or his sources are embroidering, upon material that was already legendarily embroidered upon by Ibn Ishaq's sources? And so before Ibn Ishaq, you have nothing. Muslims like to impugn the veracity of Ibn Ishaq because so much of what he says about Muhammad is embarrassing to them. But the fact is that he, even writing in the middle of the 7th century, in the middle of the 8th century, over 125 years after Muhammad is supposed to have died, he's the first and only source for most of what we know about Muhammad, or think we know about Muhammad. And so that would be like the first biography of General Grant being produced today, and there being no written records previous. And then, 50-some years later, after this, a much more detailed biography of General Grant coming out and saying so much more about him than we know now. Then clearly these things would have no historical value, and neither do the stories of Muhammad. But our friends in England and Lebanon have not made any attempt to rebut this whatsoever, but continued to insist instead upon completely subjective evaluations of the Quran as a miraculous book that we have also shown in many ways to be false. And so I leave it to you to sum up.
Well, we haven't seen any evidence. I mean, It's a very simple request. How do we know Muhammad existed? If at the end of the day, all you have is this book, which we have very little early evidence for, which is filled with all kinds of errors and which has gone through numerous versions, much of it has been lost. This says it, therefore we believe it. Well, that may be convincing to you. It's not convincing to anyone who can think about this issue critically and rationally.
And gentlemen, thank you very much. We're getting real close here. After this next break, we'll have 6 minutes for each side to give their closing comments. We'll be right back after this. And welcome back. We are at the time of the show now that we have a 6-minute time frame for each side to make their final and closing comments. At this point, we've reset the clock, and Sheikh Omar and Anjem, you can go right ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we come again. He's speaking about there's a lot of error in the Quran, there's a lot of mistake. He could claim whatever he like, but we know rationally it is a book which is man has no finger on it, and mentioned in chapter Fussilat verse 42, لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه تنزيل من حكيم حميد. There is no faults, there is no error, there is no mistake in this book. Even in the time 1400 years ago, where the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace of God be upon him, mentioned a lot of things going to happen. That you see things the Prophet prophesied, all it happened. Even nowadays, we see a lot of things has been proven that what the Prophet Muhammad said was correct. Even at that time, he has no science, no technology, no fax machine, no text machine, no Facebooks, no Twitters. So take it or leave it. The challenge is there. All you are talking about science. Quran is not book of science. Quran is the word of God. The science is subjective to many errors. People speak about Darwinism for years and got PhDs in Darwinism. After years of PhDs about Darwinism, it was wrong. False ideas, fallacies. Man is not originally monkeys. or 8. Therefore, don't try to bring science. Science is really observing the matters in certain circumstances. You make decision, could be wrong, could be right. And people speak about the atom, the smallest items, and then they find something more. But I will leave it to my friend Anjem to continue. The books, still the challenge, has no error, no mistake whatsoever. Anjem.
Sheikh Omar, and I think that the message being passed about the inimitability of the Quran, and obviously the invitation is there for Robert Spencer and David Woods, and for all of the listeners as well to embrace Islam if they wish, because if you accept that the Quran is in fact the unbeatable challenge grammatically, linguistically, for mankind, and no one can do a chapter similar, then you too will declare Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, about testimony that there's no one truly worthy of worship except for Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is his servant and messenger. And I think that the case for the Quran already has been made, but just in case people think that there are no, in fact, a hadith or recordings of what the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, in fact, in his own lifetime, I just want to repeat some of them, because as Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad said, that history is subjective. It should be subjective from individual to individual. The communists, for example, will say about Jesus that he was an illegitimate child. The Christians believe that he's the son of God. The Jews reject him completely. So this is subjective. We believe that he is the prophet of Allah. And therefore, history, like the Sheikh quite rightly said, and even science, many of these things are subjective from era to era, from person to person. But I can tell you something, that even in the lifetime of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the pages of Sa'id bin Ubadah al-Ansari were there. He had written many ahadith about oaths, about testimonies. Even Abdullah bin Abi Awfa wrote about jihad, and those collections are from the time of the Prophet himself. Even Jabir ibn Abdullah. In fact, they say that Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu had enough collections of what the Prophet said and did for a donkey to carry, meaning he had so many. And people refer to Bukhari and Muslim and these books of ahadith, but if we look at the original ones, the chains are there, where they have been meticulously, if you like, traced. And as I said, the mustakhrajat, the books of chains, 16 volumes of Abu Bakr Ismail, trace all of the chains of Bukhari directly to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, step by step. Abu Uwaina as well traced the whole of Muslim, and you can see that many others, all of the main collections of ahadith, which are the sayings, the actions, the consent of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, hundreds of thousands of them have all been checked and verified. And we can see, in fact, that what you are trying to say about the fact that there's nothing really in existence, this doesn't make sense. Muslims can prove it, but the fact that Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad is concentrating on the Quran is because you're not going to accept the references that I've given you, because you have your own historical prejudice. Therefore, you know, the challenge of the Quran remains for everybody out there, whether, you know, you are a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Sikh. Look at the Quran. It has a linguistic miracle which even till today is unbeaten, because it is something which was revealed by Allah to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Arabic language, and it must be met in that language to maintain the grammar, the style, and the meaning. And if you accept that, then you must accept as well everything that that contains, and that contains the fact that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is indeed a messenger, the stories of Noah and Abraham and Isa and Musa alayhi salam, and all of the other things that we take for granted. But this is the miracle. And the difference between this particular miracle and all of the other miracles of the messengers before is that it is not, if you like, chained to the time in which it happened. It is not, if you like, temporal, rather it is forever. And Allah promises to preserve the Quran. And we can see that even today, the Quran has been preserved. Anyone can go to the Quran, they can look at
30
it,
seconds.
and they can inshallah witness that miracle. So we would just like to finally say from our side, that indeed Islam is the truth, and we believe in all of the messengers of God, including Moses and Jesus and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being the final messenger. And the invitation is there for Robert and David and all of the Christians who are watching today to look at the Quran and accept the truth of Al-Islam and to join the 2 billion Muslims, the fastest growing religion and ideology in the world today.
Thank you, Anjem. Very good timing right there. We're going to go ahead and give the last 6 minutes of this particular segment to the Christian side. Go right ahead, gentlemen.
Well, here we are in our conclusions, and Anjem finally tried to give some kind of historical evidence for the existence of Muhammad. Not very good. I'm going to allow Robert to respond to that. I'm going to try and sum up the rest of the debate thus far. We didn't see during the actual debates any historical evidence for the existence of Muhammad. The only claim was that the Quran says it, therefore it's true. So it couldn't defend Muhammad's existence historically, and the only defense of the Quran was entirely circular. How do we know that the Quran is the Word of God? Because there's no error in it. Well, what about all these scientific errors we can point out? Well, those aren't really errors. How do you know? Because the Quran says that there are no errors. And how do you know that's because the Quran is the Word of God? It's entirely circular. And let's look at one more circular argument that's been given to us. We gave evidence from your Muslim sources that the Quran has not been perfectly preserved. What was the response? It has to be perfectly preserved because the Quran says so. So the Quran's the Word of God. Why? Because it's been perfectly preserved. What about all this evidence? Well, all that evidence must be wrong. Why? Because the Quran says that it's been perfectly preserved. Circular, classic example of circular reasoning. Now, think about this, because now your entire case is just self-destructed. Sahih Muslim, number 2286. Abu Musa, companion of Muhammad, says that the Muslim community forgot 2 entire surahs because they didn't recite it enough. And he says, we used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity to Surah Barat. I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this, which I remember out of it. If there were 2 valleys full of riches for the son of Adam, he would long for a 3rd valley, and nothing would fill the stomach of the Adam but dust. Where's that verse? Not in the Quran, because the chapter is gone. Not according to me, not according to Robert, according to Abu Musa in Sahih Muslim. But that's not good enough for you. What about Aisha? Do you believe Aisha? Aisha said in Abu Ubaid's Kitab, Fadl al-Quran, Surat al-Azab used to be recited in the time of the Prophet with 200 verses. But when Uthman wrote out the codices, he was unable to procure more of it than there is in it today. 200 verses in there, according to Aisha. How many are left today? 66. 2/3 of the entire chapter were gone because Uthman couldn't find the rest of it. And the coup de grace here. Sunan ibn Majah, part of Sahih Sittah, number 1944. It was narrated that Aisha said, the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it. Where are those verses, Anjem and Omar? They're not in the Quran. Aisha says they're supposed to be in the Quran. What happened to them? Aisha had the only copy, and a sheep ate it. You quote Surah 15, verse 9, and tell us the Quran says Allah will protect it, and Allah could not protect your Quran from a sheep. Why in the world would I ever believe that he could protect the rest of it? No reason whatsoever. But if you tell me all of these passages are wrong because they say the Quran's been corrupted, then you just told me that all of your historical sources are wrong, in which case we're right back to the central problem. We have no historical evidence. You've just thrown out all of your main authorities and sources. Thank you.
And as far as the evidence that Anjem did present, he was talking about these volumes and volumes of the chains of transmitters that have supposedly established the authenticity of the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and Ibn Majah, the ones that David was just quoting. And so you, by yourself, your own testimony, are attesting to the authenticity of these hadiths. But in any case, obviously, as I said before, the chains themselves can be forged as the hadiths themselves have been forged. We know that Bukhari, according to Islamic tradition, collected 300,000 accounts of Muhammad's words and deeds, and from those he sifted out 3,000 that he considered authentic, which meant that 297,000 traditions of Muhammad were forged by Bukhari's own admission. And you're telling me that, no, the chains of transmitters, that could never be forged, when you have this incredible forging industry, forging hundreds of thousands of stories of Muhammad, and nobody ever thought, wait a minute, we could get people to believe this is authentic if we forge a real good chain of transmitters to go with it. That never happened, of course. That couldn't have happened. It's all ridiculous. As you yourself said, Anjem, it's historical prejudice, but the historical prejudice is all on your side, not on ours. And as far as historical prejudice goes, I wanted to close. I don't know if you can see this. It's a coin that was minted in the Arab empires in the 680s. And it's on page 44 of the book, Did Muhammad Exist? So I don't know if we can see that here tonight, but you can get the book and see it. It's a coin, and it says Muhammad on it. And on the other side, there's a picture of a ruler with a cross. Now, we know that Islam hates the cross. We know that in Islam, Jesus is supposed to be a Muslim prophet who will come back and break all the crosses. We know the Quran says they did not kill or crucify him. So why is the Arab Empire minting coins that say Muhammad and they have a cross on them? That could not have happened by any stretch of the imagination or by any explanation you can offer if Muhammad really existed, if the Quran existed, and if Muslims believed and accepted those things at that time. There is just no way. Now, this is hard evidence. This coin exists, unlike Muhammad. This coin can be seen. And I have other coins in the book that are the same way. This is something that is absolutely inexplicable according to the canonical Islamic story of the origins of Islam. Because, as you yourself would testify, the cross, by your view, is an abomination. Why are Muslims putting crosses on their coins with Muhammad's name on them if the story of the origins of Islam is true? It's not true. Muhammad never existed, and I believe we have established that tonight.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We have reached the point in our debate tonight that both sides have made their case. We will take a brief break. Just to let everyone out there, we've been talking about it all throughout this program. We welcome your calls at 248-416-1300. We actually have one caller already on hold, and we'll get to that after this break. But just go ahead and don't waste any more time. If you're listening, if you're watching, please give us a call. We'll give you an opportunity to ask either side your question. We'll want to move through this quickly, so make sure you know what your question is and who it's directed to. We'll have you state that question. That person will have an opportunity to respond, a 1-minute rebuttal, and then we'll go from there. So get those calls in at 248-416-1300, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back on this inaugural program of Jihad Watch. We do have a caller. We'll ask this caller to go ahead and make his question, say his question, and then direct it. And we have Manu on the phone.
Yes. Hello, hello, Chris.
Hello, Manu. How are you?
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
My question is towards the Christian team, Robert Spencer, David Wood.
Okay.
I want him to answer in a general term, why is their reasoning not unjust when they compared hadith and sources of hadith that came 200 years after the Quran, when you contrast the Quran, which the compilation of the Quran came from the closest relative and friends of Prophet Muhammad, and they put their seal of approval on this document, and why is their reasoning not unjust when they compared the hadith that came 200 years later, and they put it in the same boat with the Quran, and they tried to say that the hadith is saying some variant. For example, the Quran, the sources of the Quran are dozens and dozens of people, and they're all close relatives and friends of the Prophet Muhammad. But then the variant could be somebody from 50 years later. Why is their reasoning not unjust?
Okay, thank you. 2 minutes.
Okay. The problem with your question is that your understanding that the Quran is attested by close associates, relatives, and friends and followers of Muhammad is all based on Islamic tradition that was recorded 150 to 200 years later. There is no evidence from the time of Muhammad or the time Muhammad is supposed to have lived. There is absolutely no document from the 630s, 640s, 650s that says the close relatives and friends and associates of Muhammad are attesting to the Quran. There is no indication of that whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, there are very strange, telling, opposing traditions. For example, as I mentioned before, Abdul Malik in the 690s says, I'm afraid that I'm going to die during Ramadan. And people said, why do you think that? And he said, because I was born during Ramadan, I was weaned during Ramadan, I became caliph during Ramadan, and I collected the Quran during Ramadan. Now, why would anybody have invented such a tradition and put it into Abdul Malik's mouth if the Quran had already been collected 50 years before by Uthman? Why would anybody have originated such an idea that Abdul Malik had put the Quran together if the Quran had already been put together? It just makes no sense at all. One thing we can do that makes sense of the available evidence is to say Abdul Malik and his associate Hajjaj ibn Yusuf and others, they put together the Quran much later than it's supposed to have happened. They put it together out of existing Jewish and Christian and pagan sources, and then they retrojected it back to the time and started to originate those stories that Muhammad's friends and associates and companions attested to all of this. And then the traditions that David and I have adduced about all the variants and all the parts that were forgotten and lost, this was a result of the fact that the collection of it was haphazard. And people did have variants, and they had to explain, how is it that we had these variants? And they took that and put that back into the time of Muhammad as well, and said that it was because a sheep ate this, or because we forgot about that, or something, stories of these kind. And this was to reconcile these variant traditions. But there is, again, absolutely no evidence from the contemporaries of Muhammad that they actually put together the Quran or had it at that time.
At this point, we're going to let our Muslim counterparts go ahead and you have 1 minute to respond to that question if you'd like, that answer.
You see myself, I have really made it clear. I'm not going to go through all their own fabrications about error and mistake because that is easy for me to answer. In chapter of Al-Isra, verse 106, Allah says, وَقُرْآنًا فَرَقْنَاهُ لِتَقْرَأَهُ.
Anjem, we'll have to have you. Anjem, would you mind? We have some Skype issues again. Go ahead, Anjem.
I think that basically what is being said here is more or less the same as what was said before. And again, I think that the best proof that, in fact, what is preserved in the Quran is, in fact, has been done contemporaneously in the life of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is by his own instruction, on the instruction of Jibreel alayhi salam, and then from him to his Sahaba, is the fact that we only have one Quran nowadays. This idea from Robert that there are different types, you're talking about the warash, if you like, recitation, which is a slightly different way of reciting the Quran. You're not now talking about a different version of the Quran.
We're going to have to move along. Okay, we have another caller. Greg, make your question to us, and who is it directed to, sir?
Oh, hi. Yeah, my question is directed to Robert Spencer. And he specifically claimed that there was no historical evidence for Muhammad within the first 60 years. And I have a compendium of 7th century Arab texts, a text by Middle Eastern scholar Robert Hoyland. And he mentions the first explicit reference to Muhammad in history, which dates to 634 AD. And specifically, I'll give you the specific quote here. At the 9th hour, there was a battle between the Romans and the Arabs of Muhammad in Palestine, 12 miles east of Gaza. The Romans fled, leaving behind the patrician Brendan, whom the Arabs killed. Some 4,000 poor villagers of Palestine were killed there, Christians, Jews, and Samaritans. The Arabs ravaged the whole region. So my question for Robert Spencer is, if Muhammad is merely a title, praised one, for Jesus, then why are these Christians, supposedly the Arab Christians, are killing the Roman Christians? Is this not a genuine, explicit reference to Muhammad's existence in history? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Actually, the first thing that has to be said about that passage that you read, and I discuss it at some length in the book, is that Robert Hoyland, the source for whom that you use for this passage, he actually translates as Arabs a word that is tayyeye. The actual passage says that the tayyeye of Muhammad, MHMT, did all these things that you quote. It doesn't say Arabs. And this is significant because there is actually no use, no mention of Muslims or Arabs in any of the contemporary literature. Now, there is this MHMT. Now, you could say, well, that is obviously Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. But then the question is, why is this in isolation, this one mention of this, which could, as you yourself acknowledged, be a title, the praised one, that could refer to anybody else? And there's no indication in any other contemporary literature of any kind of prophet of Islam or Quran or any mention of these things until much later. And this one is problematic. The problem with Robert Hoyland's book is that he consistently translates as Muslims or Arabs words including Tayyeye, Saracens, Ishmaelites, and Hagarenes, all of which were used by the early conquered people to describe the people who were conquering them, who they never referred to Muslims. And you have this lone reference to Muhammad, but actually I just gave you another reference to Muhammad that was on that coin that says Muhammad on the one side and has the ruler with the cross on the other. And so what we have references to this word, Muhammad, which, as you say, means the praised one, but no indication whatsoever that this was a prophet of the Arabs who had a holy book and a new religion. There's no indication of that until, as I said, some 60 years later.
Anjem or Sheikh Omar, would you like to respond to that? You have 1 minute if you do. Would you like to make...
I'm trying myself to explain to you from the beginning all those false really, and lies allegations. Easy for me to refute it, but I'm not going to give time for that. You see, for argument's sake, say books really of Lenin has some error. Doesn't mean there's not proof that is really that Lenin not exists. Okay, it's just it's very shallow. Now, for us, we say to you, there is no errors, no mistake in the Quran, and that's for me the authenticity of the Quran, proving rationally. In order not to go in this, you see very pathetic arguments that is really this is the book of God and has no false on it. Now, the other things he mentioned and Orientalist people mentioned, I'm professionals in these topics, and Anjem knows. I'm not going to give you time to answer you because it's irrelevant and important. I'm dealing with you with rational things. Quran, nobody can do something similar, and that authenticity of the Quran make me believe in all the things which is the people written in the histories. Now the issues of say to me that there is some error and mistake that in your mind.
Sheikh Omar, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut it. We have to stay within our time frame. We have another caller. Radical, go ahead. Radical, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, David and Robert and the two Muslims. First, I'd like to give out my question is for the Muslim. You seem to make a big deal about this absurd challenge in the Quran. Well, I have a challenge for you. In Psalm 137, verse 7 through 9. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise to its very foundation. O daughter of Babylon, you devastated one, how blessed will be the one who repays you with the recompense which you have repaid us. How blessed will be the one who seizes and dashes your little one's head against the rock. So I challenge you, can you produce a surah like this? If your only response that the Bible is violence.
Right. Okay, go ahead. You have 2 minutes, either Sheikh Omar or Anjem.
The Bible has written really not in English language, so I'm going to pass it to Anjem. It's relevant to answer these questions. I did not hear it. Anjem.
Anjem?
Sheikh Omar, I don't think I was completely understanding the Quran either, actually, to tell you the truth, Sheikh. But I can add something, actually. You know, I studied my own, understanding of hadith from the Sheikh, and obviously the Sheikh, he has too much to say on the topic, but I can add some other, collections from the life of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for you. You know, Robert Spencer didn't even deal with the last ones that I quoted, and neither did David Wood. But if you want, there's some more. We can talk about the first political document, the Sahifat of Wathika al-Nabawiyya, the first, if you like, treatise of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the collection of Sa'id bin Jubair, the collection of Abi Huraira, the collection of Hammam ibn Murabbih. There are so many collections which were in the time of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of them documented, all of them referenced by historians, and yet you see Robert Spencer cannot even bring himself to even mention them, because basically his book doesn't talk about them. They only talk about Christians, who have a political agenda against Islam. And that is why you see, because the Quran is the thing which has been preserved, and that is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is therefore the miracle which remains a challenge for mankind to do a chapter similar. Now, that must be in the Arabic language, It must maintain the grammar, the style, the meaning. And, the shortest chapter of the Quran is only 3 verses. And, it's not something which is, somebody has to spend a long time if he wants to mention 3 verses. He can try it in the Arabic language, but I think you will find, as people have found over the last 1,433 years, or even more, that they are not able to match that challenge, and therefore it remains, and therefore we continually advise you to accept Islam and to become a Muslim.
Sorry, we're gonna move along, and I think we have an opportunity for one, or actually, I'm sorry, John.
We have a
minute? Go ahead and respond. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that these documents that you're referring to, the Constitution of Medina, and we could say the Pact of Umar and others, they actually have no historical foundation. There's no record that they existed at all in the 7th century, and I would challenge you to produce any reference to them in the 7th century or any 7th century manuscript of them. We don't hear about them until the history of Al-Tabari in the 9th century. And so to say these things, Muhammad did these things and therefore he must have existed and these things are obvious, here again, you're relying on very late material that is highly tendentious and has no foundations in earlier sources.
Okay, good. We have Abraham next. Go ahead, Abraham, and just please, concise questions. We're running out of time. What is your question, sir, right now?
Okay. Hi, my name is Adrian, not Abraham.
I'm sorry.
I have a question to the Islam team about the challenge. They said you have to produce a surah that's live, but it also has to be in Arabic. And when somebody tried to do it in English, you look down on it like it's somehow less worthy. Could you please confirm for all the viewers that I've heard that many Islamists, many Muslims all over the world, they don't understand Arabic. They read the Quran in translation. Could you please confirm if that's true or not? And, when you see these Muslims memorizing the Quran, a lot of them don't even know what the heck they're talking about. They memorize it like robots.
All right. Let them answer the question. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Anjem?
Shagama.
Can answer this question is easy, it's no problem. I don't speak English that good the way you speak English, but nobody said to me that is Shakespeare, he's able to speak English very good, that his English, nobody can beat it. So the fact I don't know Arabic, it doesn't mean Arab who speak Arabic, who are not Muslims, really cannot really take the challenge. So for me, no one from the Arab, Christian or Jews or atheists or communists did one chapter similar. That is our argument. Where the Quran comes from, rationally, if you see some things exist and no one claim it, you will say where it comes from, to whom it belongs to, etc. So what I'm talking about now, I don't want to go through all these historical things because the time is not really enough, and I will leave it to Anjem to answer if he got any other points.
Anjem?
What I can add, in fact, to what I've said before is that, I've watched, in fact, Robert Spencer doing an interview where he's promoting his book. And this idea of, no one up until 125 years after the death of a prophet, ever wrote anything. The first mention is after 60 years, 640 years. What Robert Spencer has actually done is he's chosen these arbitrary dates. These dates, they don't have any significance. They don't have any kind of historical reference. The only reference they have is from the Orientalists, among the Christians, who have as their main purpose to try to undermine Islam and to undermine the divine texts. The proof, in fact, that Islam is not going to be undermined is that it remains the fastest growing ideology in the world today. In Europe, by their own standards, the statisticians are saying that, maybe in 30 or 40 years, the Muslims will be the majority in Europe. In fact, they are concerned that once again the Sharia will be implemented as it was before in Spain, in France, in parts of Switzerland, Austria, in Greece, in Rhodes, in Crete. If Islam had no basis and the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam never existed, I think that Robert Spencer needs to ask.
We are finished with the 2 minutes. We have 1 minute for each of the gentlemen here to respond.
Well, Islam is rapidly growing, therefore it's true. Communism grew fast, therefore communism is true. And suppose we shift the argument a little bit. The largest religion in the world, Christianity, therefore it's true. What kind of absurd argument is this? The only reason Muslims use these kind of arguments is because they have to, because they can't defend anything with serious argumentation. Now, our caller, to answer his question, actually hit the nail right on the head. to say that God, as his evidence for Islam, gave an argument that only works if you happen to be trained in classical Arabic is insulting to God. It's degrading to God. It's saying he gave this argument and only a couple of people in the entire world can understand it. That's just plain silly. But if we want to go to actual Arabic scholars, Gert Puin is certainly an Arabic scholar. He said on average every fifth verse of the Quran is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. But of course Anjem and Omar would say otherwise, but they can't exactly claim not to be biased, can they?
Okay, we're going to go ahead and we have another caller. I believe it's Sam. Sam, just your question. What is it and who is it directed to?
Okay, directed to the Christian. And on the Muslim side, they say that the Quran is perfectly preserved with confidence. I never hear any Christians say that the Bible is perfectly preserved. So if Christians do believe that the Bible is perfectly preserved, can you just please explain why?
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, as Christians, if by perfect preservation you mean down to the letter, no variance at all in history, no, Christians don't believe that. I don't know any Christians who do believe that. But that's because we actually look at the evidence. We respect the evidence. If you put a manuscript in front of me and put another manuscript in front of me, and there's a word difference or something like that, then I say, okay, it hasn't been perfectly down to the letter preservation. But that's never been a Christian argument. We believe God inspired the Bible, but after that, if men are copying it down, if I could copy the Bible right now and make a mistake. So no, we don't have perfect down to the letter preservation, but neither do Muslims. Any book that's copied by human beings is going to be subject to error by scribes and so on. The difference between Christians and Muslims is we look at the manuscripts and we're honest with the evidence, and you can go into any Christian bookstore in this country and open it up and find critical editions that discuss the variants, which by the way are usually spelling differences, like spelling John with one N or two N's, things like that. But there are more significant differences, but we discuss them and we look at them and we examine them and we never deny the evidence. And you turn to Islam, you have all of the Muslim sources. I'm talking Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, the rest of Sahih Sitta, the Sirah literature, commentaries talking about all these differences, and you see from Sheikh Omar and Anjem, they don't exist. Well, here they are right in front of you. They don't exist. Well, what about all this evidence that they do exist? They don't exist. What about Aisha and Abu Musa and Ibn Umar and all of your early Muslims saying over and over again like a beating drum that chapters came up missing, large sections of chapters came up missing, individual verses came up missing, words and phrases came up missing. All of this from your most reliable authorities. Never happened because the Quran says it didn't. So what we have, if you compare the sides, one side is constantly looking to the evidence, making rational decisions based on the evidence, and the other side, whether it's historical or otherwise, is constantly denying the obvious evidence right in front of their faces that should tell you something about the two sides.
Thank you. We have 1 minute for a rebuttal. You go ahead and answer that, Anjem or Sheikh. You have 1 minute. Anjem, if you'd like.
Sure.
Would you like to respond to that answer?
Okay. Look, you are saying now Muhammad must exist. That means all your publications for the last now maybe 5 years about Muhammad and Aisha, about occupied women.
Anjem, would you mind jumping in? I'm sorry, we have this trouble with this transmission.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what the Sheikh is saying that, you have a whole program here dedicated to attacking the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have reams of books written by Orientalists talking about the life of the Prophet, when he married Aisha radiallahu anha, about his own, expeditions, the whole of his life. And the whole of your program and the whole of the attack has been traditionally from the Christians to attack the Prophet himself. And now suddenly, somebody is saying that he never actually existed. I mean, this is so self-contradictory, it's incredible. I mean, nobody really sane or, anyone with any kind of logical or sound reasoning would accept this completely contradictory stance of Robert Spencer and David Wood. These two people who are today sitting on the same side are themselves saying that tomorrow they're going to be debating with each other because they don't agree with each other. David Wood believes that Muhammad existed. Robert Spencer believes that he doesn't exist. You can't even make your own minds up, let alone debate with Muslims. So I think get your own house in order, and then after that, we can have a decent debate.
Okay. Well, speaking of that, we have one last question from John. John, just your question, and who is it directed to?
Yeah, this is for Anjem and Omar.
Okay.
Given your argument tonight, if I do not know Arabic, do I have any objective reason to believe that Muhammad ever existed?
Anjem.
Question.
Thank you. Anjem, would you like to ask?
Let's see if we can get Sheikh Omar on the line.
Questions, I hear you. Anjem, go ahead.
Yes,
John, are you still with us? Could you ask that question again?
I'll ask the question again. I said for Anjem and Omar, given your argument tonight, if I do not know Arabic, do I have any objective reason to believe that Muhammad ever existed? If I don't know Arabic, given your perfect Quran argument.
Gentlemen.
Yes, if you don't know Arabic, obviously you will never be able to taste the challenge and taste the miracle. Because all what happened, you see, I don't know Arabic, but the Arab Christians, the Arab Jews, they know Arabic very well, better than the Arab Muslims, and yet they say to you, nobody can do one chapter seminars, therefore, man has no finger on it. If I give you a cup of water, I put my finger on it, you'll never drink it. So you want to have something pure to drink it. And the same thing, I will leave it to Anjem to answer you if anything really remain, he want to answer.
Anjem.
To that even if you cannot speak Arabic, you can see from the Quran that there are so many things in the Quran which there's no way for someone in the 7th century to know. And as someone who studied medicine at one point, I can tell you the development of the embryo is something that people discovered recently. Yet if you have a look at Moore's anatomy, for example, a famous American doctor, he includes verses of the Quran. Because why? Because there's no way for someone to know that in the 7th century. That is something that people discovered recently, which is proof that he must have been divinely inspired. And I can go on about many verses of the Quran which agree with what we understand now, and which prove in fact that he must have been someone who received revelation, and therefore, this proves the authenticity of the Quran and as well the messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Thank you. And we have one more minute here for the gentleman to respond to that answer.
Yeah, I actually wanted to address something Anjem said a minute ago, that what we're saying is contradictory. I actually have written a biography of Muhammad earlier, The Truth About Muhammad, that's based on Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Sa'd and Bukhari and Muslim and the other early sources. And that is a representation of what the earliest sources say about Muhammad. And now in Did Muhammad Exist, I have examined the historical value of those sources and find them wanting. There's no contradiction in this at all. It's very important for non-Muslims to know what Muslims believe about Muhammad. And for example, that he did marry a 9-year-old, consummate a marriage with a 9-year-old when he was 54, and that this makes child marriage normative for Muslims and allowable for Muslims. Whether or not Muhammad actually existed or did this, this is something that's important to know. But there's no contradiction in this whatsoever. There is the distinction between what Muslims believe about Muhammad and then whether those things actually have any basis in fact at all. And now David can respond to the rest.
Quickly.
Well, I said as soon as I began speaking that I do believe Muhammad existed, but I don't believe Muslims can prove it because of the absurd methodologies that they would use. I think we've seen a very good example of that. The Quran says it, therefore Muhammad existed, when the Quran is filled with errors. I think we've seen this. Can I do better? That remains to be seen, but obviously I was right that Muslims cannot even prove Muhammad's existence. How can we ever believe in Islam?
Well, gentlemen, we thank you, Sheikh Omar and also Anjem Choudary for your participation on the Muslim side, and of course Robert Spencer and David Wood for being a part of this first inaugural program of Jihad Watch, a 2-hour program. It's flown right by. And we appreciate everyone out there that's been watching our program and calling in as well. Continue to do that. Know that this is a listener-supported and viewer-supported ministry. ABN is Aramaic Broadcast Ministries here, and we continue to appreciate your prayers, your financial support. Continue to call us anytime at 248-416-1300 and check us out on the website at abnsat.com. Robert, your website for?
Jihadwatch.org, J-I-H-A-D watch.org. Updated many times daily with news and commentary about violent jihad, stealth jihad, jihad in the U.S., jihad around the world, what Anjem's doing, what Omar Bakri's doing, the whole deal. Jihad Watch.
Okay. And David, would you like to, how to contact you or your
my blog is answeringmuslims.com. I have a lot of debates there, a lot of resources there.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we appreciate everyone's participation today. Keep up the good work. We look forward to the next time. God bless you, and the debate continues, if I can say it right. Thank you so much.